Part 1 Blackwood Dormitory, Westmorland 1997. Segment 1 The paper, the silence, and the whispers beneath the bed. It was always colder inside the dorm than outside, even in late September, when the woods of Westmorland burned red and gold under the low English sun. The stone walls of Blackwood Academy sweated with moisture, as if the building itself remembered things it would rather forget. My name is Elias Hawthorne, 13 years old, first term at Blackwood. My parents said the school was prestigious. A Hawthorne should stand among the Blackwoods, father insisted, but from the moment I stepped through the wrought iron gate, I felt something watching. Not someone, something. Room 312 sat at the end of the north wing, up 2 flights of creaking stairs where portraits of dead headmasters watched you pass. The corridor bent slightly near the end, so the light from the oil lamps never quite reached my door. Even during daylight, that hallway looked bruised by shadow. That was where I first met Rowan Blackwood, my roommate, heir to the family that owned the entire academy. He was pale, too pale for a boy his age, with dark hair combed perfectly straight and grey eyes that didn't blink enough. His uniform was always immaculate. He called me Mr. Hawthorne until I told him not to. Then he smiled, thinly, and never called me by name again. Our first week was uneventful, if unsettling. He rarely slept before dawn. Sometimes I'd wake and find him sitting on his bed, whispering into the dark, as if repeating lines from a play I couldn't hear. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Practicing the tongue my family forgot." Then he'd turn away, and that was that. On Friday night of the first week, Rowan handed me a small square of yellowed parchment, smooth like old skin, smelling faintly of smoke. Etched upon it, in dark brown ink, were Latin words I could barely read. Non feras ranum, Salem, aut ullum crystallinum substantium in conclave tricentum duodecimum. Underneath, someone had scrawled in English, "Do not bring frogs, salt, or any crystalline matter into room 312. I laughed, thinking it was a private joke, maybe an initiation prank. Rowan didn't laugh. "I'm serious," he said quietly. "The salt interferes. The crystals attract them." "Them?" I asked, still smiling. He only said, "You'll hear it soon enough," and tucked the parchment beneath his pillow like a sacred text. The days were long and grey. Lessons in Latin and mathematics blurred together. The teachers spoke in low voices, as though afraid to disturb the silence that seemed to cling to every room. By the third week, sleep had become difficult. The old oak outside our window scraped its branches against the glass, and the dormitory pipes hissed like whispering voices. One night, around 2 in the morning, I woke to a noise, not the usual creaks or drips, but a voice. Low, rhythmic, repeating a phrase over and over in the dark. I sat up. Rowan's bed was a lump of shadow in the opposite corner. His back was to me. The voice, soft, almost tender, was coming from beneath his bed. The words were Latin, whispered in the same cadence he used during the day. Something like, "Saltum non, saltum non." I froze. The room felt heavy, as if the air had thickened. I could hear his breath above the whispering, steady, calm, awake. "Rowan?" I said. The whisper stopped instantly. Silence swallowed the room. Then Rowan turned his head slowly toward me, his eyes wide open, pupils blown black. "Go back to sleep, Elias," he said. "It's late." I lay there, pretending to sleep, but I didn't close my eyes again. 2 days later, I made a discovery. While Rowan was at fencing practice, I noticed a loose section of wall behind his desk, an uneven patch of stone. I pressed against it, and a small slab shifted inward with a sigh of dust. Behind it was a hollow space. Inside lay a leather-bound book, edges darkened with age, pages stiff with something that looked like dried blood. It was a ledger, a list of names, each written in precise handwriting, followed by a thin red line drawn through them. I counted. 47 names. 42 crossed out. 5 untouched. The last name at the bottom of the page made my chest tighten. Elias Hawthorne. No red line. Not yet. I shut the book, shoved it back into the wall, and replaced the stone. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. That evening, I watched Rowan carefully. He seemed normal, even cheerful, humming an old hymn as he sharpened a quill. But when he looked up, he caught my gaze and tilted his head slightly. Did you move anything in the room today? My throat went dry. No. Why? Just felt different when I came in. He smiled, but it wasn't warm. You'd tell me if you found something, wouldn't you, Elias? I nodded, too quickly. He said nothing more. But that night, I dreamt of parchment skin peeling from the walls, and my name written in red beneath hundreds of others. By the 6th week, the rains came. Heavy, endless rain that turned the woods black and the paths to mud. The dormitory smelled of damp stone and something metallic, like old coins or blood. I woke one stormy night to the sound of glass clinking. Lightning flashed through the window, illuminating Rowan standing beside my bed. He held a glass jar, empty, his lips moving in a frantic murmur. Saltum non, saltum non. His eyes had rolled white, only the sclera showing. His face twisted with some emotion I couldn't name, pain, fear, devotion. Rowan! I shouted. He didn't stop. The wind howled, thunder cracked, and the jar slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. Then he smiled, a strange, peaceful smile, and collapsed backward, limp as a rag doll. I knelt beside him. His pulse fluttered, faint but there. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, and for a second, I thought I saw something move inside his pupils, a shadow that wasn't mine. He recovered by morning, though he claimed not to remember anything. You must have dreamt it, he said. Maybe you're overtired. But the jar fragments were still there. That was when the headmaster's wife, Mrs. Blackwood, Rowan's mother, visited our dorm unexpectedly. She was a tall woman with silver hair pinned in a severe knot, her black dress rustling like dried leaves. She looked at Rowan, then at me. You mustn't disturb my son's sleep, Mr. Hawthorne, she said softly. He suffers from episodes. Family history. Best to leave him be when they happen. She placed her hand briefly on Rowan's shoulder. He didn't react. When she left, I noticed a faint red mark on her wrist, circular, as if something had gripped her too tightly. I started sleeping with the lamp on after that. Every sound became an omen, the ticking of the clock, the wind through the eaves, the faint scuttling beneath the floorboards. Then came the snake. It was dawn, maybe 5 a.m. I woke to a pressure around my neck, something cold, slick, and alive. I opened my eyes and saw the green coils of a viper, its body tightening slowly, scales glinting in the half-light. My scream caught in my throat. Across the room, Rowan sat at his desk, calmly flipping through his book. Don't move, he said evenly. They like warmth. If you startle it, it'll bite. I could barely breathe. He lifted the same glass jar, now whole again, and whispered something in Latin. The snake loosened its grip, slithered down my chest, and slid smoothly across the floor into the jar. The lid sealed itself with a soft click. Rowan smiled. See? Nothing to worry about. I couldn't answer. My hands trembled too violently. That night, I tried to leave the room. I packed my books and reached for the door, only to find it stuck. The handle turned but wouldn't release, as though welded shut from the other side. Behind me, Rowan said quietly, "You're not supposed to leave until it's done." I turned. His eyes gleamed like mercury in the dark. "Until what's done?" I demanded. He stood then, moving closer, his breath cold against my cheek. Until the list is complete. Segment 2, the 13th night. The week after the serpent was the longest of my life. Rowan spoke little, slept even less. The rain did not stop for 6 days, and neither did the whispering. It came from beneath the floorboards now, like the creak of an unseen mouth forming half-remembered prayers. Sometimes I thought I could make out words, fragments of Latin drifting through the hiss of the storm. Saltum non, sanguinum, serva sanguinum. Save the blood. By the 5th night, my lamp had burned its final wick. Shadows pooled in the corners like water. I spent hours sitting upright in bed, the blanket clenched in my fists, watching the faint rise and fall of Rowan's chest. At 2:17 a.m., he sat up. No hesitation, no grogginess, just movement, mechanical and deliberate. He turned toward the window, which rattled violently in the wind. Lightning flashed, and for a heartbeat the world turned white. Something was on the glass. At first I thought it was rain, but the droplets didn't run down. They crawled upward, tiny red threads spiraling like veins, pulsing faintly in the light. I whispered his name. Rowan. He didn't respond. He reached out a hand and pressed his palm to the window pane. The red lines gathered beneath his skin, sinking into him. His body trembled. Then he spoke, voice low and steady. They are thirsty tonight. By morning the glass was clean again. Rowan slept at his desk, head buried in his arms, a faint trail of dried blood under his nose. Classes went on as if nothing had happened. But I noticed the other boys avoided him now, sidestepping his desk in the hall, refusing to meet his eyes. One even crossed himself when Rowan walked by. That evening, I caught a glimpse of the ledger again. He'd left it open on the desk while washing his hands. A new mark slashed through one of the remaining names, James Calder, a boy from the floor above. The next day, Calder's bed was empty. His belongings were gone. No one spoke about it. Not the teachers, not even the headmaster. When I asked Mrs. Blackwood, she said only, Mr. Calder's parents withdrew him unexpectedly. It happens. But her hands were trembling when she said it. The storm that night was worse than any before. Thunder rolled through the valley like cannon fire. The lights in the dormitory flickered and died just before midnight, leaving only the thin blue glow of lightning through the windows. I lay awake, every sense alert. The air felt charged, humming with something alive. Rowan was standing again, barefoot on the cold stone floor, facing the window. He held that same glass jar, now filled with a murky black liquid that shimmered when lightning struck. He was whispering faster this time, the words tumbling over each other like a chant gasping for air. Saltum non, saltum non, saltum non. I reached for him. Rowan, stop, whatever you're doing, stop. He didn't hear me. His hand shook violently. The jar vibrated in his grip, the black liquid swirling. Then it began to boil, though the room was ice cold. Rowan. He turned then, and what I saw stole the breath from my lungs. His eyes were pure white, no iris, no pupil, just two blank orbs glowing faintly like candles behind frost. His mouth moved, but the sound that came out wasn't human. It was deep, gurgling, layered, as if several voices spoke through one throat. The jar burst. A dark vapor exploded outward, filling the room with the stench of rot and iron. The window shattered from the inside, shards spraying like shrapnel. A shape rose from the floor, a massive shadow, viscous and shifting, clawing upward until it scraped the ceiling. Its form was almost human but wrong, the limbs too long, the fingers like hooked iron. It reached for Rowan. I screamed his name, lunged forward, grabbed his wrist, but my hand passed through him like smoke. He was already fading, the edges of his body blurring into the darkness. The shadow bent over him, pressing its claws into his chest. There was a wet sound, like fabric tearing, and Rowan's mouth opened in a silent scream. Then, all at once, the storm went quiet. No thunder. No wind. Only the drip of blood from the broken glass onto the stone floor. Rowan fell forward. The shadow recoiled, folding in on itself like a dying flame, and vanished into the cracks of the wall. I stood there shaking, the taste of copper in my mouth. Rowan's body was warm but limp, his pulse faint. And carved into the wood of his bedpost, fresh and deep, were 5 Latin words. Sanguis servabit nomen tuum. The blood will preserve your name. He awoke before dawn, pale as parchment, and smiled weakly. Bad dream, he said. I didn't answer. My eyes were fixed on the jar. It sat on his desk again, whole, unbroken, empty. There was no trace of the glass shards, no blood, no scorch marks. Only the smell of ozone and something faintly sweet, like decayed flowers. The next day, the headmaster called an assembly. He announced that, due to structural repairs, the entire north wing would be closed until further notice. Dorm 312 included. We were to move our belongings to temporary rooms. When I went to pack, Rowan was gone. No books, no clothes, no jar. Only the small parchment he had given me on the first week lay folded neatly on my pillow. But the words had changed. The Latin line had been struck through in red, and beneath it, written in a trembling hand, were 2 English words. Soltum non. At least not you. I reported it. The staff said Rowan had returned home for medical reasons. No one knew when, or if, he would be back. That night I slept alone in room 312. I should have felt relief. I didn't. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of pages turning. The ledger was lying open on Rowan's desk. A single candle burned beside it, though I hadn't lit any. A new line of red stretched across the final name, mine. I stared until my vision blurred. The candle flickered, gutted out, and in the dying light I saw movement under the bed, something dark shifting in the space where Rowan once slept. Then a whisper. Soltum non. A pause. Not yet. The room fell silent. At dawn, I went to the headmaster's office. Mrs. Blackwood was there, sitting in her husband's chair. Rowan's gone, I said. Something happened in our room. You must know what that list is. You have to. She raised her hand to silence me. Her eyes were rimmed with sleeplessness, her face drawn and pale. Mr. Hawthorne, she said softly, there are traditions in this house older than the school itself. My son was meant to continue them. You were simply present. Present for what? The exchange, she whispered. One life completes another. The names are never random. I backed away, heart pounding. You're insane. She smiled faintly, a tear cutting down her cheek. If only madness could save us. That evening, the police arrived. They said Rowan's belongings had been found burned in the woods behind the chapel. No body. The case was closed as a runaway during the storm. But when I returned to my new room, I found a fresh piece of parchment slipped beneath my door. The ink was still wet. The handwriting, identical to Rowan's. The list is longer than the walls, Elias. We only thought the school could hold it. At the bottom, beneath the curling letters, a single crimson fingerprint. Segment 3, the list never ends. It's strange how silence has a shape. After all these years, I can still feel the one that lived in room 312. A silence with corners and breath, waiting for someone foolish enough to listen. My name is Elias Hawthorne, though sometimes, when the wind moves through the trees outside my flat in York, I hear another name whispered instead. Rowan. 28 years have passed since that autumn at Blackwood Academy. The school closed in 2003, officially due to financial mismanagement. But I know what truly sealed those gates. It wasn't money. It was the list. When I left Westmorland, I didn't speak for weeks. My parents thought I was traumatized from losing a friend. They were right, in a way. I just couldn't tell them what kind of friend he'd been by the end. I told the police that Rowan had vanished during the storm. I didn't mention the Latin, or the jar, or the blood. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. But I kept the parchment. The original one, the rule about salt, frogs, and crystals. I didn't mean to. I found it inside my coat pocket when I unpacked. I tried to burn it once, years later, but the flame slid off it like water. Sometimes, at night, the ink glows faintly red. When you're 13, you think evil has fangs and claws. You imagine it leaping from shadows, roaring, easy to name. But real evil, the kind that lingers, is quiet. It whispers. I spent years trying to convince myself that I'd imagined it. The chanting. The snake. The ledger with my name in red. Maybe I'd dreamed everything. Maybe Rowan had been ill, or hypnotized, or possessed by grief. Then, in 2001, I received a letter. No return address. Inside, a torn page from that same leather ledger. 48 names now. The last line read, Elias Hawthorne, crossed out. Beneath it, in dried brown ink, a new entry. Harriet Vale. At first, I didn't recognize the name. A month later, the news reported a tragedy at a private academy in Surrey. A girl named Harriet Vale had been found dead in her dormitory after a fire. The cause was unknown electrical malfunction. The school's name? Valewood Hall. I looked it up. Founded 1889. Motto in Latin, Soltum non oblivici. At least, do not forget. The same phrase Rowan whispered every night. I tried to contact Mrs. Blackwood. She'd moved from Westmorland after the academy closed. The address I found led to a nursing home in Devon. They told me she'd been admitted for progressive dementia. She rarely spoke, except to whisper to the walls. When I visited, she was sitting by the window, thin as parchment, staring into the rain. Mrs. Blackwood, I said softly. It's Elias. From the school. Her eyes moved toward me, cloudy with age, but sharp with something deeper. Recognition. He said you'd come, she murmured. My breath caught. Rowan? She smiled faintly, her lips trembling. Not Rowan anymore. His, many now. Her gaze shifted past me, toward the corner of the room. He's been keeping the names safe. Until the building returns. The building. She leaned closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper, brittle and papery. You never burn stone, Elias. You only wake what's sleeping inside it. A nurse appeared at the door, apologizing, saying Mrs. Blackwood needed rest. As I turned to leave, the old woman called after me, her voice suddenly clear, almost young. Salt the doorways this time. And don't bring crystals. That night, I dreamt of Rowan for the first time in decades. He was standing at the foot of my bed, wearing the same school uniform, hair neatly combed, skin too pale for the light. But he was older now, my age, and his eyes were not human. He spoke softly, like a brother greeting me after years apart. You left before the work was finished. I tried to speak, but no sound came. It follows names, not bodies, he continued. You carried yours away. He reached out, and I saw the faint outlines of dozens of hands pressing beneath his skin, other shapes, other faces, shifting like shadows beneath water. There are more now. They all need a name. I woke screaming, the room thick with the smell of rain and iron. My window was open, though I live on the 7th floor. And on the sill lay a small glass jar. Empty. 2 weeks later, I went back to Westmorland. Curiosity, guilt, obsession, call it what you like. I needed to see the ruins of Blackwood one last time. The forest had swallowed most of it. The main hall stood half-collapsed, the old dormitory wing hidden under ivy. The walls were green and slick, the air heavy with the scent of rot and moss. But room 312 was still there. The door leaned off its hinges, marked with soot and rain. Inside, everything was gone, beds, desks, even the floorboards. Only stone and dust. I might have left then, if not for the sound. A whisper, faint but distinct, coming from the hollow where the wall once hid the ledger. I stepped closer. The stone gave slightly under my hand, as if breathing. And then I saw it, etched into the rock, deep and precise, as if carved by claws. Elias Hawthorne, freshly cut, wet with something dark that gleamed red in the dying light. Underneath, a line I hadn't seen before. Sanguis servabit nomen tuum. The blood will preserve your name. I don't remember leaving the building. I only know I woke the next morning in my car, parked beside the gate, the engine still running. On the seat beside me was the parchment, folded neatly. The ink had shifted again. This time it read, Donec iterum. Until again. Sometimes, when I pass the river on my way to work, I glimpse my reflection in the glass of office windows. Once or twice, I've seen someone else standing just behind me, dark hair, pale face, grey eyes that never blink. The lights flicker when I notice him. I've moved 3 times since then, changed my number, even changed jobs. None of it matters. The whisper always finds me. It begins softly, Latin syllables I almost remember, words that roll through my head when I try to sleep. Then the air grows heavy, and I feel the cold creep along my spine, and I know. Room 312 never left me. I'm writing this now because the pattern has started again. A month ago, a boarding school in Yorkshire closed suddenly after a student went missing. The photograph in the paper showed a cracked dormitory window, its shards embedded in the wall from the inside out. There was a smear of red across the glass. Someone had traced a name there with their fingertip. Elias Hawthorne. But I never went there. At least, I don't remember going. If anyone finds this journal, burn it. Use salt. Don't keep the pages near mirrors or metal. And for God's sake, don't speak Latin when you're alone. Because it listens. It always listens. And if you hear a voice whisper, saltum non. It's already too late. Part 2 Graythorne Manor, Yorkshire Moors, 1999. Segment 1, The House with a Pulse. The road to Graythorne was narrow and cruel. Rain sliced across the windshield like nails, and every turn seemed to lead further away from civilization. The moors stretched on forever, a sea of black grass and stone, ancient and patient. By the time I saw the house, my headlights had dimmed to a yellow cough. It rose from the fog like a half-buried skeleton, an enormous manor crouched low against the wind, all gables and shadow, its windows glinting faintly with a color that wasn't light. I'd come here under false pretenses. The letter said, Caretaker Position Graythorne Educational Trust. They offered lodging and pay enough to cover debts. But I wasn't here for money. I was here because of the name on the envelope's return address. Harriet Vale Memorial Fund. Graythorne Manor was once a sanatorium, later converted into a preparatory school. It closed after a fire in 1998, faulty wiring, they said. Same as Valewood Hall. Same as Blackwood Academy. Coincidences are comforting lies for the sane. I'd stopped being either. A man named Dr. Simon Albrecht, the estate's new curator, greeted me at the gate. He was tall, neatly dressed, the kind of polite that conceals exhaustion. He told me I'd be maintaining the West Wing, keeping the generator stable, documenting anything salvageable from the archives. Graythorne's a peculiar place, he said, voice brittle with understatement. Things here tend to remember what they were. Inside, the manor breathed. That's not metaphor. The wallpaper swelled slightly with every gust, and faint pops echoed through the wood as if the house had lungs. I could smell the age, old varnish, wet stone, something faintly coppery beneath. My quarters were in the old staff wing. The room was small but clean, a cot, a desk, a narrow window facing the moors. On the desk lay a guest ledger, its pages yellowed and cracked. The first entry dated back to 1904. The last was written a year ago. In precise, careful ink. Harriet Vale, accepted to Graythorne. March 7, 1998. I closed the book and stared out the window. Somewhere beyond the mist, a faint light blinked. 3 short flashes. Pause. Too long. I thought it was a generator fault until I realized it matched the pattern of Rowan's old dorm signal at Blackwood. 3 short. Too long. I'm awake. At dinner, Dr. Albrecht spoke little. The dining hall echoed with the moan of the wind. He asked if I'd settled in, if I'd noticed any inconsistencies. I asked what he meant. He smiled faintly. Doors that lead to rooms you don't recall entering. Clocks that disagree with the hour. Reflections that arrive late. When I laughed, it wasn't because I found him absurd, it was because I already knew. Afterward, he handed me a small iron key. Basement archives, he said. Just don't go down after midnight. The generator's current interferes with perception. I explored that night anyway. The basement was colder than physics allowed. Moisture clung to the stone steps, and the sound of my boots echoed twice, once in front of me, once behind. The archives were arranged like a morgue, rows of metal cabinets, each labeled with dates and room numbers. I opened one at random. Inside were glass jars. Dozens of them. Each sealed with wax. Each contained, not specimens, not documents, but something like condensed breath. Tiny clouds, swirling faintly inside. One jar bore a label. Blackwood Dormitory, Room 312. The glass was warm. And somewhere deep within it, I heard a sound like distant chanting. A sudden noise, metal groaning, made me look up. A figure stood at the far end of the corridor, half hidden by shadow. He wore the old Graythorne uniform, black jacket, silver trim, no face. Just a blur where eyes and mouth should be. He raised one hand slowly, pointing toward me. Then he dissolved, not into mist, but into cracks, like the surface of old glass breaking. I dropped the jar. It didn't shatter. It breathed out. The air filled with whispers, my name, again and again, merging with others. Rowan. Harriet. Mrs. Blackwood. And something new. Graythorne. The word itself carried weight. The lights flickered, and the whispers fell silent. When I looked back down, the jar was gone. Dr. Albrecht found me an hour later, sitting on the basement steps, shaking. He didn't ask what happened. He simply said, "You've seen the resonance, then?" I demanded an explanation. He led me to his office, a study lined with medical sketches and old architectural plans. On the wall hung a massive diagram labeled, "The Oral Network of Graythorne." He pointed to the inked lines spreading through the manor's floor plan like veins. The house was built on an acoustic principle, he said. Stone tuned to specific frequencies. Every wall is a resonator. Every corridor, an amplifier. He paused, adjusting his glasses. The children who once stayed here, they left traces. Vibrations of thought. Trauma embedded in architecture. I stared at the diagram. The lines converged at a single point, room 312. Except this time, it was labeled Graythorne West Wing, Chamber 12. The pattern replicates, Albrecht said. Across schools, across decades. The same proportions, the same anomalies. As if someone were rebuilding the same structure again and again. Someone? I asked. He looked up, his expression a mixture of fear and awe. Or something. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled like a warning. I walked the corridors to calm my nerves, but the layout had changed. The hallway bent left where it should have gone right. Doors I'd passed earlier were gone. At the end of one corridor, I found a mirror, tall, freestanding, wrapped in dust. In its surface, the reflection of the hallway continued, but instead of my face, I saw a door marked 312. My pulse quickened. Behind me, the air grew warm. And from the glass, a voice whispered in Latin. Donec iterum. Until again. The same words from the parchment. I reached out, stupidly, instinctively, and the mirror pulsed beneath my hand. Not cold. Not solid. Alive. Then something pressed back. When I woke, I was in my bed, sheets soaked with sweat. On the floor beside me lay a jar, identical to those in the basement. Inside, a wisp of mist that pulsed faintly with red light. My reflection in the glass moved half a second late. And when I leaned close, it whispered, in my own voice. Welcome home. Segment 2, The Resonance. I began recording the sounds on my dictaphone 3 nights after the mirror incident. It was easier than sleep. Each night, the house spoke in frequencies I couldn't name, moans in the pipes, heartbeats in the floorboards. At 3:12 a.m., the noise would spike. Always 3:12. Sometimes, amid the static, I'd hear a voice whispering just under perception. Not English. Not quite Latin. A composite language, like broken glass arranged into a pattern that almost makes sense. I wrote in my notes. The house doesn't echo sound. It remembers it. Dr. Albrecht pretended not to notice my exhaustion. But on the 4th morning, I found a note slipped under my door. His handwriting, small, precise. If you hear them singing, do not reply. That afternoon, I confronted him in the library. The man looked different, thinner, as though light avoided his outline. I demanded to know what he meant. He exhaled, fingers trembling against his teacup. The resonance, he said. It mimics. When the pressure in the foundation reaches a certain threshold, the house produces phonetic duplicates. Fragments of those who once stayed. He looked at me over his spectacles. They sound like people, Elias. But they aren't. He opened a ledger, revealing columns of names, caretakers, students, visitors, all crossed out with neat, single lines. Every name had a corresponding note beside it, returned to the walls. I asked him what that meant. He only smiled, sad and distant. It's a form of architecture's hunger. That night, I left the dictaphone running by my bedside. At dawn, when I played it back, there was silence for the first 20 minutes. Then, faintly, a child's voice. Play with me. The phrase was repeated 7 times, each slower than the last, until it dissolved into static. Then another voice, lower, cracked with age. She remembers you. I replayed that fragment dozens of times, isolating frequencies, comparing timbres. It wasn't Albrecht's voice. It wasn't mine. I didn't realize until later what the recording had captured beneath it. A whisper so faint it required amplification to hear. A girl's laughter. And underneath that, Rowan's voice. By the 6th night, the manor's geometry had begun to shift perceptibly. Rooms doubled back on themselves. Windows looked out onto corridors. One staircase led upward, but ended in a ceiling mirror reflecting downward stairs. I drew maps, labeled each variation. By the 3rd revision, the diagrams formed a spiral. At its center, a circle labeled Chamber 12. The same place I'd seen in Albrecht's chart. I decided to investigate. The west wing was forbidden, collapsed after the 1998 fire, according to the curator. But the locks were new, and the air that seeped from the gaps smelled not of ash, but of iron. Inside, the walls had warped, bulging like muscle beneath skin. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing what looked like veins of black quartz running through the stone. As my torchlight passed over them, they pulsed faintly. At the corridor's end, a door stood ajar. Its number plate was half burnt, but I could still read it, 312. The handle was warm. From within came the faint sound of breathing. I pushed the door open. The room beyond was smaller than I expected, and impossibly clean. A bed, untouched. A wooden desk. A mirror above a cracked sink. And on the desk, a leather-bound notebook identical to the one I'd found years ago at Blackwood. I opened it. Inside were names. 47 again. My name was there, crossed out in red. Below it, a new one had been added. Amelia Whitby. The ink was still wet. The lights flickered. Behind me, the mirror on the wall clouded over, surface rippling like breath on glass. I turned. A figure stood within, not reflected in the mirror, but behind it. A young girl, pale as frost, eyes hollow, mouth sewn shut with what looked like copper wire. She raised her hand, small, trembling, and pointed at me. The same gesture Rowan had made. Then she opened her mouth, and the wires snapped one by one with wet metallic clicks. The sound filled the room like shattering teeth. "He's still inside," she whispered. The mirror bulged outward, stretching as though something pressed from the other side. Hands, dozens, emerged beneath the glass, pushing against it until the surface fractured, spilling dust like old bone. A voice rose from beneath the floorboards, lead and wrong, chanting the same words in 100 overlapping tones. Donec iterum. Donec iterum. Donec iterum. I backed away. The air thickened, dense, syrupy. My heartbeat slowed, matching the rhythm of the chanting. The bed began to sink, as though swallowed by the floor. And then I saw them, faces surfacing from the wood itself, eyes moving behind the grain, mouths open in silent screams. They were all children. I ran. The corridors bent, twisted, folding back into themselves like a collapsing lung. Behind me, footsteps, too light to be Albrecht's. Every door I passed bore a number ending in 12. 212, 412. 712. The manor was rewriting itself around me. When I finally burst into the foyer, the front doors were gone. In their place stood the mirror again, tall, freestanding, flawless. I caught my reflection and froze. It wasn't me. It was Rowan, 13 again, smiling faintly, eyes milky white. He lifted his hand and wrote across the mirror's surface in condensation. "We never left." The reflection leaned forward, pressing its forehead to the glass until cracks spidered out from the point of contact. Then the cracks spread outward, not through the mirror, but through reality. The air itself fractured, light bending at impossible angles. I fell backward. When I hit the floor, the manor was silent again. No mirror. No doors. Just Dr. Albrecht standing at the top of the stairs, expression unreadable. He descended slowly, kneeling beside me. "Now you've heard it," he whispered. "Now it knows your name again." Later, in his study, he handed me a fresh notebook. On its first page, in the same red ink, "Resonance log. Subject Elias Hawthorne, Phase 2. He met my eyes and smiled faintly. "You were never the first, Elias. But you might be the last to remember." Segment 3, The Collapse. By the second week, I no longer trusted the calendar. Dates slipped, March became December, then reversed. My notes contradicted themselves. Some pages I didn't remember writing, but the handwriting was mine. In one margin I had scribbled, "The house uses memory as mortar." Another line, beneath it, in unfamiliar script, "And memory bleeds both ways." Dr. Albrecht avoided me. His study remained locked for days. When I finally forced the door, I found it abandoned, dust settling on the diagrams, cups of tea gone cold beside half-burnt candles. On the wall above his desk, written in what looked like rust, were the words, "312 is the mouth." The phrase repeated downward like an infection, each iteration shakier than the last. And beside it, photographs pinned in a spiral. Blackwood Academy, Valewood Hall, Greythorn Manor. Each building's blueprint overlaid on the next until they formed a single composite structure. A cathedral of corridors, impossible angles aligning into a design shaped like an ear. At the spiral's center, the image of a child's face blurred by movement, mouth open mid-scream. Underneath, Albrecht's final note, "The house is listening for its next architect." I tried to leave the next morning. The path to the road was gone, swallowed by fog. My compass spun in slow, lazy circles. Every direction led back to the manor. Every turn of the doorknob brought me into a room I had already left. Time looped like a skipping record. Outside the windows, the moors shifted, sometimes daylight, sometimes night, sometimes nothing at all but a black plain where the horizon should be. At 3:12, the air always trembled. That night, the generator failed. Silence settled over the estate like a lid. And from the walls came breathing, hundreds of lungs pulling the same single breath. I followed the sound to the basement. The air shimmered, thick as water. Each step downward multiplied my reflection on the damp stone until there were dozens of me descending in parallel. At the bottom, the archive room was gone. In its place, a vast, circular chamber I'd never seen before. The walls were made of glass jars. Thousands. Each pulsing faintly from within. Each whispering in its own pitch. And in the center, a massive jar as tall as a man, filled with dense red mist. On its surface, etched in black, Hawthorne. My own name. The jar trembled as I approached, mist swirling violently. Then, a voice from within. "You took his place." The glass cracked. I stumbled backward as a wave of air rushed out, carrying the scent of iron and rain. Within the mist, a shape formed, a figure stepping forward until the fog parted. Rowan. 13 again, pale and impossible. His eyes were black now, and his smile was wrong, stretched too wide, as though the skin remembered what it meant to grin, but had forgotten the reason. "You kept my book," he said softly. "So you became it." I tried to run, but the air thickened. He moved closer, voice echoing in every direction. "Every house needs a name to anchor it. Blackwood had mine. Greythorn has yours." His hand, translucent, pressed against my chest. Cold, invasive. My heartbeat stuttered, then matched his rhythm. The jars around us began to rattle. One by one, they cracked, releasing bursts of sound, screams, prayers, laughter, all bleeding into one continuous tone. A frequency so low it became vibration, then pressure, then pain. I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the chamber warped, glass bending like water. In every jar, faces appeared, children, teachers, caretakers, all whispering the same phrase. Donec iterum. Until again. The mist enveloped me. For a moment, I saw everything. Blackwood collapsing into flame. Greythorn drowning in fog. A row of London terraces glinting under sodium light. Behind one of their windows, a child in a yellow sweater, waving. Then the world inverted. Walls folded inward, corridors twisting into spirals, floors tilting until up became inward and gravity dissolved. Through the noise, a single voice, female, calm, reciting a litany. Resonance achieved. Subject Hawthorne, integrated. Chamber 12 stabilized. My last coherent thought was of light shattering through the jars, thousands of red eyes opening at once. Then everything went black. When I woke, it was morning. The manor stood silent, pristine. No damage, no dust, no evidence of any collapse. The calendar on the wall read June 12, 1999. Dr. Albrecht sat at the dining table, reading. He looked up as if nothing had changed. "Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne," he said pleasantly. "I trust the night was restful." He gestured toward the far wall. There, hanging neatly beside the clock, was a framed photograph. It showed me, or someone who looked like me, standing beside him on the manor steps. The inscription below read, "Elias Hawthorne, caretaker, Greythorn Educational Trust, 1998. The dash was empty. That night, as I unpacked the last of my belongings, I found a new ledger on my desk. Blank pages. Title embossed in gold, Blackwood Academy Alumni Register. I opened it. The first line was already filled in. Rowan Blackwood, expelled, 1997. Elias Hawthorne, promoted, 1999. Below, a single empty space waiting. Under it, faint pencil marks, half erased. Amelia Whitby. I am writing this now because I suspect memory itself will not last much longer. The manor is quiet again, but every surface hums softly, like a throat preparing to speak. At precisely 3:12 each night, the reflection in my window moves before I do. Sometimes, in the glass, I glimpse other places, a dormitory bed, a child's mirror, a window across Brick Lane. And last night, for the first time, a girl's voice whispered from the dark beyond the pane. "You left me." The words trembled the glass. When I touched it, the surface pulsed, warm, alive, and I felt the house inhale. I think the resonance has found its next conduit. If anyone ever finds this account, burn it. Burn the manor. Burn whatever bears the number 312. Because the truth is simple. None of these places are haunted. They are hungry. Part 3 Brick Lane. Segment 1 The Girl in the Yellow Sweater. London, 1985. I was 9 the summer my father bought the flat on Brick Lane. Rows of soot-colored terraces leaned together like tired old men, and every window seemed to hold a story that didn't want telling. Our building was narrow, 3 stories, hemmed so close to its twin that you could have passed a cigarette across the gap. My bedroom faced the other house directly, no more than 3 meters of air and shadow between us. The first day, I noticed the sealed window opposite. Boards nailed from the inside, paint blistered by time. My father said the Graves family lived there, an elderly widow, and no one else. But that night, a light flickered behind those boards, soft, golden, rhythmic, like someone breathing beneath the wood. At 3 p.m. the next afternoon, the boards were gone. A girl about my age stood behind the glass, black hair, yellow sweater, waving as if we'd been friends for years. She pressed a sketchbook to the window and held up a picture of a bird with broken wings. I grabbed my own pad and drew the same. Thus began our game, silent guesses through glass. Her name, she wrote, was Clara. I never saw anyone else in that house. Sometimes the curtains behind her moved, as though a draft carried through hallways unseen. Sometimes her eyes darted sideways before she smiled again, as if listening for something. One day, I held up a note, "Can you come out?" She shook her head violently. Then, in jagged letters, wrote, "He'll be angry." That was the first time I felt the wrongness, not fear, exactly, but the slow pressure of something observing from the cracks between bricks. The 13th of October, 2 a.m. Rain clawed at the windows. I woke to tapping, steady, deliberate. Clara stood there, illuminated by lightning. Her face was pale, lips gone. Blood trailed from the corners of her mouth down the yellow wool. She mouthed 2 words. "Help me." Then she pressed her hand against the glass. The pane fogged instantly, blooming with a handprint so bright it seemed to glow from within. I screamed for my father. When he arrived, the window was empty. Only that crimson outline remained, drying slowly, like paint. The next morning, Mrs. Graves appeared on our doorstep. A small woman, skin like parchment, eyes far too calm. She told my father that his son had a vivid imagination. That her daughter, dear Clara, had died 20 years ago. That we mustn't disturb the dust. I stopped looking at the window. But glass has a way of wanting to be seen. In every reflection, kettle, picture frame, rain puddle, I caught her silhouette, hovering just beyond focus. Sometimes, late at night, my radio picked up whispers between stations. A child humming a nursery rhyme half a beat too slow. The same tune Clara used to tap against the glass with her knuckles. By Christmas, the wall between our houses began to sweat. Moisture darkened the plaster in the shape of 2 handprints, side by side. Father painted over them. The marks bled through by morning. 30 years later. I am 36 now. A photographer. I returned to Brick Lane last week, hunting for the building's symmetry, the way light still bends in those narrow alleys. Mrs. Graves is long dead, the property is condemned. The boards are back on the windows, thicker, bolted this time. Through the lens, everything looked smaller, safer, until the 6th photograph. In it, the boarded window is open, and a figure stands behind the glass. A woman, pale, eyes hollow, wearing a yellow sweater. Except the sweater isn't hers. It's mine, the one I wore the day I moved away. That night, I developed the negatives. On each exposure, words appeared scratched into the emulsion, letters made of light. You left me. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the film. Behind me, the radiator clicked, once, twice, 3 times, the rhythm of a knock I hadn't heard since 1985. When I looked up, my reflection in the darkroom window wasn't alone. Clara stood beside it, her head tilted at that impossible angle children sometimes make in nightmares. She smiled, not cruelly, not kindly, just recognition, as though time itself were a glass pane and she'd been waiting for me to look through. He built it for you, she whispered. Now you'll help me out. Her hand reached forward. The glass didn't break. It bent. I woke on the floor, lungs burning, camera smashed beside me. Every photo had fused into one, an image of 3 buildings superimposed. Blackwood, Greythorn, Brick Lane. In their windows, the same figure stood, sometimes boy, sometimes girl, sometimes nothing but shadow. And scrawled across the composite print, in a child's uneven script. Until again. Segment 2: The Reflection Theory. They say the camera never lies. They've clearly never stared at a photograph that rearranged itself every time you blinked. For 3 nights I couldn't sleep. I spread the photos across the flat like evidence at a crime scene. Each print warped differently, windows that moved, faces that sharpened, shadows that learned. In one shot, I saw myself at age 9, sitting on the Brick Lane windowsill. The details were exact, the cracked ceramic cat, the navy curtains. But the eyes of the boy were wrong. Too aware. He was looking past the lens, straight at the adult me. I called Dr. Ellison, an old acquaintance from the photography department at King's. When he arrived, his first reaction was irritation. He thought I'd staged a trick. These aren't chemical defects, he muttered, scanning each image under a magnifier. They are reflections that shouldn't exist. He pointed at the shimmer around my childhood figure. Notice the curvature here. The distortion isn't planar. It's concave, like the photos reflecting through another surface. He hesitated, then added quietly, "Oliver, what's a Blackwood dormitory?" The words are faint in the emulsion. Someone wrote them before it dried. I hadn't mentioned that name to anyone since 1997. That night, Ellison took one photograph home to study under controlled light. By morning, he was gone. His flat door hung open, kettle still steaming. The photo he'd borrowed sat on the counter, face down. When I turned it over, I saw him, not in his kitchen, but in my hallway, eyes closed, head resting against the wall like a penitent monk. On the back of the print, in trembling biro, a single line. "Mirrors remember what we forget." I started charting connections: Blackwood, Greythorn, Brick Lane. Each building aligned on an old survey map, along a faint ley line of disused chapels. Each chapel had one feature in common: a reflective font of water built from black stone. Some archival photograph from 1893 showed a priest standing beside one such font. The caption read, "Consecration of the Oratory of St. Verus. The mirror below shall bind the unburied." The priest's face blurred into shadow, but the outline behind him, narrow shoulders, child-sized, looked too familiar. The dreams returned after that. In them, I walked through the Brick Lane corridor, camera in hand, yet every door led somewhere else. One opened to the Greythorn dormitory, dust floating like candle ash. Another revealed the Blackwood staircase, descending forever. At the landing's bottom, water. A surface like polished obsidian, reflecting the ceiling perfectly. When I leaned closer, my reflection spoke. "You've lived here longer than you remember." Then something beneath the water touched my reflection's face, and my own cheek felt wet when I woke. 3 days later, I received an unmarked parcel. Inside, a reel of Super 8 film. The label read Greythorne, 1982, property of Sister Magdalene. I borrowed an old projector from a friend and threaded the reel carefully. The footage jittered, black and white, showing a classroom of children reciting Latin hymns. Then, sudden static, a flicker, and the frame froze on a single child at the front. Me? Or someone identical? Behind him, reflected faintly in the glass of a framed crucifix, stood Clara. Her lips moved silently. I replayed that fragment again and again until the bulb nearly burned through. Her last word was visible for only a second: open. The following evening, I smashed the plaster of my Brick Lane flat, behind the radiator where the damp handprints used to appear. Beneath the paint, my fingertips found something smooth. A mirror. 6 inches by 8, embedded directly into the wall. Behind it, nothing but darkness. When I wiped the dust away, my reflection didn't move. It stood still, breathing quietly, then whispered, "She's beneath the glass." I don't remember picking up the hammer, but the next instant the mirror shattered, and water spilled out. Actual, freezing water, pouring like a burst lung. Inside the cavity, a child's sketchbook floated up. Its pages were perfectly dry. The drawings were mine: birds, corridors, a dormitory on a hill. And on the final page, the words, "He is building another one." Beneath it, a date, 2015, and a simple address written in ink that hadn't yet faded. It was a warehouse by the river. I drove there just before dawn, camera in the passenger seat, city still asleep. Fog rolled off the Thames, thick as milk. The warehouse doors were unlocked, hinges protesting softly. Inside, the air smelled of metal and brine. Rows of mirrors lined the walls, hundreds of them, angled toward a central pool. Above the pool, a child's yellow sweater hung from a chain, dripping steadily. When I stepped closer, the reflection in the water wasn't mine anymore. It was every place at once: the dormitory, the convent, Brick Lane, folded together like pages of the same book. And somewhere in that dark reflection, something moved, deliberate, patient, waiting for the next observer to blink. Segment 3: The Architect Beneath the Glass. There are no clocks in the warehouse. Time folds strangely when you stand among mirrors that refuse to echo your reflection. I counted my breathing, not seconds. Every inhale fogged a different glass, every exhale birthed another version of myself. Some younger. Some already dead. The yellow sweater still dripped over the pool, but the rhythm of the drops had changed, faster now, deliberate. Each plop struck the surface like a knuckle rapping from below. Knock. 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 Something was answering. I circled the pool, camera raised out of habit more than reason. The flash pulsed once, illuminating dozens of photographs pinned to the back wall. Every one of them was mine, the photos from Brick Lane, Greythorn, even the sketches from my childhood desk at Blackwood. Pinned at the center, a map. A hand-drawn grid of England with 3XS connected by a crimson thread. Westmorland, Yorkshire, London. Beneath it, a Latin phrase scrawled in the same shaky handwriting I'd seen on the old parchment years ago. In speculo non moritur. In the mirror, it does not die. The air thickened. The temperature dropped as if the warehouse inhaled. I heard the whisper first, a child's voice layered with dozens of others, reciting in overlapping Latin, backwards. The pool rippled though nothing had touched it. Then a hand surfaced. Pale. Small. The same white skin I remembered pressed against that window 30 years ago. Clara's face followed, eyes milked over, mouth stitched with what looked like hair. But when she opened her mouth, the stitches snapped and her voice was mine. You left me. I stumbled back. The camera fell, still recording, capturing the reflection as it twisted, her form splitting into two silhouettes, one of a child, one taller, older. Rowan Blackwood's eyes opened in the reflection beside her. He looked unchanged, 13 forever. The grin was the same one I'd seen described in that old-school ledger, white eyes, no pupils, teeth too many for a human mouth. He spoke from the mirror, not the water. We built a bridge, Oliver. Between the rooms. Between the years. Behind him, I could see them all, Amelia in her nightgown, the children of Greythorn pressing against invisible glass, their faces inverted like film negatives. The surface shimmered, and for a moment, I saw my younger self among them, staring back with pleading confusion. It's not a haunting, Rowan whispered. It's inheritance. The lights above the pool exploded, raining glass. In the strobe of broken bulbs, I saw movement beneath the water, figures crawling upward, slow, skeletal. The mirrors surrounding me began to tilt inward, reflecting not me but the other places, the dormitory, the manor, the old Brick Lane house, each layered over the next. The geometry was perfect, a mirrored cathedral made of memory. Then the water rose, impossibly, crawling up the walls like black mercury. It filled each mirror from the inside out, sealing the images behind a fluid sheen. When it reached the ceiling, the warehouse turned upside down. I was standing on glass. Beneath me, the others. Elias was there first, whispering prayers through cracked lips. His voice echoed, Saltem non, over and over. Amelia stood beside him, clutching the hand of the ghost child that had tormented her, both faces blurring together like two halves of a photograph melting. And Clara, poor Clara, hovered between them, her form flickering like a candle behind wet glass. I realized, with a horror so complete it numbed me, that these weren't hauntings at all. They were foundations. Each story, each building, had been part of one vast construct, a cathedral of mirrors stretching through centuries, built by a consciousness that learned to travel through reflections. We weren't witnesses. We were bricks. The voice came again, older, deeper, resonating through every mirrored surface. Every story is a room. Every eye a door. You have opened enough of them, Oliver. The floor beneath me softened. My shoes sank slightly, as if into liquid glass. Reflections of my hands rippled upward from below, gripping my wrists. They were my own hands, younger, dragging me toward the surface of the mirror beneath me. I struggled, screamed, kicked, but sound died instantly. Only the vibration remained. Faces pressed against the underside of the glass, hundreds of them, whispering the same word, "Stay." In the final seconds before I slipped through, I turned my camera upward. It was still recording. The lens caught one perfect frame, my reflection merging with the surface, the child version of me smiling from inside. And then I was somewhere else. A small room. Stone walls damp with moss. A single wooden desk. The smell of ink and candle wax. On the desk lay a sheet of parchment. My handwriting, though I had not yet written it. Do not bring salt, or frogs, or crystals into room 312. The wax seal at the bottom was still warm. Footsteps approached from the corridor. When I turned, Rowan stood there, older now, almost my age, eyes human again, but filled with grief. He handed me a mirror no larger than a hand. "Someone must keep it open," he said softly. "It only dies when no one remembers." Then the door closed behind him, and the candle blew out. I woke in my flat, camera beside me. Dawn light filtered through the curtains. Everything was normal, except the walls. They shimmered faintly, as if painted over with a sheen of wet glass. And on the inside of the window, written in condensation, "You remember."